Alors, je vous présente, pour ceux qui ne le connaissent pas, Göran Äkerström. Je ne sais pas comment on prononce juste ton nom, hein. Je ne suis pas sûr que ce soit tout juste. Hein, mais... Ah, ok. Il est vétérinaire aussi, encore un. Il a étudié à Uppsala. C'est juste, hein, tu as fini tes études à Uppsala. Ensuite, il a été directeur de la formation étatique des maréchaux ferrants, hein, en plus, à Uppsala. Puis, moi, je le connais depuis cette époque-là. Il était chef vétérinaire du trot en Suède de 2010 à 2015. Et puis, depuis l'automne 2015, il est chez nous en Suisse. Il est chef vétérinaire de la FEI. Voilà, s'il a quelque chose à rajouter, il peut y aller. Sans ça, je t'en prie. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jill, and thank you for the invitation and this opportunity to present for this group. I know many of you, and it's really good to see so many good friends and colleagues around here. It's been a long time since we could meet in person. It's a challenge having the presentation right after lunch, especially since the morning presentations were absolutely excellent and really interesting, so thank you for that. And I'm also going to talk, as you will see from my CV, it's dominated by regulatory affairs of horse industry. So that will be the main theme of my presentation, regulatory, the regulatory perspective, as well as a couple of the tools that we are using. I want to share that with you. For example, one of them is truly unique for the world. So FEI first. FEI is 100-year-old global governing body of equestrian sport. We have 136 national federations all over the world, and many of them also have very different cultures, which is of importance, different languages, which is of even greater importance sometimes, especially when it comes to regulations. And you need to keep that in mind when you work with FEI, because this is global. And it's easy from the Western European perspective to have views, perspectives, ideals about things that may be completely foreign, sometimes for some people almost bizarre, what we ask them to do from a regulatory perspective. We have 7 disciplines, slowly moving down to 6 because reining will be out, partly because they did not want to play ball with us on the anti-doping side, which we see very seriously upon. Around 5,000 annual events around the world, and over 50,000 actively registered horses. We have a lot more in the database, but those are actively registered horses that are competing in our events. So the bar has been set very high through the FEI Code of Conduct for the welfare of the horse. The welfare of the horse must be paramount at all times and must never be subordinated to competitive or commercial influences. It's very high. In reality, does it work like that? Does it always been met? No. One example of that was the Spanish outbreak of herpes virus. This outbreak would clearly not have happened, according, in my view, if there wouldn't have been commercial influences towards FEI officials and some others. Clearly so. So of course that has impact, but it's a goal and we must always keep that in mind and work towards it. So why must the horse come first at all times? So this is the perspective. This is what we need to work towards all the time. So we have, first of all, a moral obligation. It's a unique partnership with the horse. And for us as Western Europeans, this comes relatively naturally, but it depends also within Europe. But if you go to Middle East, you also have religious parts in this. If you go to the Far East, in some countries, there are no such things. It's not in the discussion whatsoever in the most extreme cases. So it really depends where you are in the world. But we have this moral obligation, and for us as a regulatory body, we must make sure that we do our utmost to make this happen all over the world. Level playing field then. So it's really about having equal, fair conditions under which you compete against each other. And this is critical for us being an Olympic sport. Because if you don't have that, it's very difficult to remain in the Olympic family, which means a huge lot to us and a lot of people around the world. But this level playing field is also, it has become an arena, and very interestingly, today when I heard the presentations, I see some of the best athletes. It was very obvious in Tokyo, are also the ones that take best care of their horses. They make sure that their horses' behavioral needs and physiological needs are met as far as ever possible. I think we have three names I would like to mention is Peder Fredriksson. I think Steve Goodall also does a good job, and Charlotte Chardin. Their horses are allowed to be horses. And it's not always the case, but you see they're really on the top of the podium year after year, and they keep their horses for a long time. So it has become a recipe for success, and we hope they will also play a role be role models for others. Also, clean sport is critical to stay in the Olympic family. You must not have doping. I'm going to speak a lot about that later. But clean sport is clearly a problem, and especially in endurance sport, as many of you know, that we are meeting severe challenges within that field. And I will present later how we try to meet a couple of those. Safety for horses and riders. A happy, healthy horse is safer for itself, safer for other horses, and safer for the rider. It's very obvious. What we do with horses in trotting, racing, equestrian is accepted by most governments and the public, but we need to remain working very hard and always improve. And I think this seminar is a typical example where there's an exchange of information, influences, and also networking where people maybe can meet, maybe have presentations coming from, for example, Barbara coming and presenting for the veterinary committee, for example. That's the kind of, we need to be up front and working hard all the time for that. But we talked about money earlier. The value of the equestrian sports and racing and harness racing in Europe is at least 52 billion euros per year. That's a lot of money. And indirect jobs, 500,000, direct and indirect jobs, 500,000 just in European Union and UK. And that is also important to make sure that this can continue for all these people and for the culture. If sports misbehave, we will be regulated, and regulated hard. It may even be banned. So it's critical that this continue, also for the sake of culture and jobs and money. International trade and movement of horses. So Europe sells a lot of horses to various places, and it's important that the culture that we have here with horses, the good parts of it, that we also export that with the horses. It's a lot of knowledge, but also about attitudes and partly culture, respecting the horse. So we have challenges, and let's not pretend they don't exist. Increased competition, decreased rest periods. The number of competition, especially in jumping, has increased tremendously. And there are so many opportunities to compete now. Does that mean that the horses are competing more often? So we have started a project with Professor Tim Parkin, Bristol University, to look at risk factors for career longevity of jumping horses. And one of those risk factors, the first one actually that he was asked to look at, was whether horses compete too often and how that affects them. Medication instead of recovery. We have evidence that this has been a major problem, particularly in endurance. Horses being trained and competed on bisphosphonates to a very large extent. It increases risks. It increases risk for fractures. And it also, as I said, a horse that trains hard also needs to have rest, not just physical, but also mental rest. So this is very important. And if horses even are medicated with psychoactive drugs, which we see more and more, not very often, but we see them in our doping samples. That's a very serious sign that we need to be observant on what's going on here. I mentioned fractures, particularly in endurance. I will come back to that, how we work to prevent those. Aggressive riding. You see a picture there of what rollkur, there are different names of this, but let's call it rollkur. That's what I call it. But you also have aggressive riding with jabbing in the mouth of horses on horses that work in other forms. So it's not just about the form of the horse, it's more to it than that. And we need to be really aware of that. And the judges, especially dressage, have a huge mission to make sure that they open up for a more horse-positive dressage. And I think the statement that was referred to in your Emanuela's presentation on the happy, healthy horses, a happy athlete, is a step in the right direction. I will come to doping and technical doping more in detail, because it is a problem in some disciplines. I would say jumping, dressage, eventing, very small problem, but we have endurance, and we have major problems with it. So after Beijing, the equestrian competition took part in Hong Kong, as many of you know. We had more positives than any other Olympic sport. I think there were 8 positives, and that was a shockwave through the equestrian world, and they saw a clear risk of being actually kicked out of the Olympic family, which would have been a catastrophe for very many countries, because the only support they get in their country is through the National Olympic Committee. Fair play, which is also critical to stay in the Olympic family, and then of course public perception. This looked so bad, and it was so bad. So they made this Clean Sport initiative and put together a program with regulations, a Clean Sport website, the equine prohibited substance list, and then we have the EAD-CMP, the Equine Anti-Doping and Controlled Medication Program, that is really about taking the samples, sending them, analyzing them, and then bringing those that have positive samples to legal procedures. So this is at the heart of it, the EPSL. So there are 2 types of prohibited substances, and there are some special new rules around this, but I just go through the basic. So banned substance, we have around 1,000 of those, and this change on an annual basis. And controlled medications, there are 250 of those. But to that, we can also add substances with a similar chemical structure or a similar effect. And this is reviewed annually. I'll come to that later, sorry. This is reviewed annually, and it can be proposals from national federation. The Swiss Federation, for example, is very active in doing that, which is much welcome. Controlled medications are substances that are therapeutic and or commonly used in equine medicine, and they're considered to have the potential to affect performers or a potential welfare risk if you use them. And you cannot use those at events, but you can use them during rest periods. You can treat, because horses, when they're sick, they must be treated, of course. One thing that I believe we very shortly will need to regulate is antibiotics, and that is due to antimicrobial resistance. And it's going to be legislated right in our face if we don't do that very quickly. So going back, by the way, so it can be used under competition. For example, equestrian horses at the international event, they could sometimes stay for weeks at one place, and you can have an ongoing competition. Let's say that you have an allergic reaction or something that needs stitching. A horse fell because it should have slept earlier, but it didn't. It was sleep deprived. Hopefully that wasn't due to, it had some problems. So it needs stitching. Then you can do that if it's not affecting the performance of the horse, or there's a risk that the participating in the competition will stop or prevent healing or worsen the injury. So, but each and every case are evaluated before this is done. And those horses are almost always also tested to make sure it's not giving additional ones to kind of speed it up. Banned substances must never be used. And this is very challenging because many of these banned substances are also naturally occurring. So there's a risk for contamination. So we have in recent years put in place, especially after Steve Gidda's case, we have something called specified substances, and we have atypical findings. Those are protocols that can be applied to further investigate, to have another legal process if there's a natural cause for the finding. It's a balance between legal safety for the athletes and the equine welfare. So finding that balance is always a challenge, but we must always try to do the most. And I'm happy with the latest, with these two specified and the typical findings, the way they're working. So we renew this annually, and we have, as a federation, a country can then suggest, and anyone can actually do that, but they need support from their national federation. For example, you want a certain substance to be banned, moved from banned to controlled medication, or taken off the list, or added to the list. And this is reviewed by 10 independent specialists. And it's really a good discussion every year on this. And equine welfare is really at the heart of this discussion. We published this with 90 days notice, so they will be published now on the last of September for 2022. And you can find this in the FEI Clean Sport app if you're interested of that. So the way this program works is that the FEI veterinary department runs it. We select events, the number of horses to be tested. We liaise with the national head vet of the country. Like Constance, she's the national head vet of Austria, so we would liaise with her on some of the events. And this is particularly important outside Europe. In Europe, there was a good existing system. But outside Europe, they had their own system. But now everyone is part of the global system and has to be. So what we do with this, we risk-based. For example, all endurance events in Middle East, they are tested. and it's because of the high risk. We had 13.9% positives of the samples we took, which is just, it's almost unreal. So another pillar of the anti-doping program is people. And without proper officials, and for this role, it's particularly important that they are independent. They must not have any conflict of interest with horse owners or athletes. They must be completely independent, and many of them are high academics. We have several professors, Professor Bruyat, that may be known to some of you from France. And it's critical that these people are handpicked. And quite often we turn down people that want to become testing vets because they had close connection to a horse owner or etc. And that's not, they can become very upset, but it's the only way to protect the system and the horses. So they do the field work, really. That's what they do. We also have testing technicians. That's a new role, a new official role, and they work to support either vet delegates or testing veterinarians when they test. I had to be honest, many, myself included when I was in practice, paperwork wasn't on the top of the priorities, and it must be when you're a testing vet. So these testing technicians are really, really good in that, ensuring when they work with the vet delegates, that often are fantastic vets, but when it comes to the paperwork, to make a legal case strong enough if there's a positive, all the paperwork must be more or less spotless. So that is one important part. And we try to have more and more vet delegates testing. They are the ones that are usually appointed by either the National Federation or the organizing committee. And we want to test more and more unpredictable, because we try to keep it confidential as far as possible to which events are tested. Everyone knows that if there's a World Cup final, Nations Cup final, Olympic Games, there will be testing. And the names of the testing vets are displayed, but if you have a 2-star in advance, it should also be tested, and they should never know when it's going to happen, and that is really important. A system must be unpredictable. We work with 5 laboratories, 2 in Europe, Paris, or the stars moved. Oh darn. So we have 1 in Newmarket, 1 in Paris, 1 in Hong Kong, 1 in Tokyo, and 1 in Sydney. And these labs are very important to us. They're another of the cornerstones. Sadly enough, we don't have an American lab because they did not meet our requirements. Hopefully they will requalify. So these labs, we have very strictly set criteria for them. Most of them are racing laboratories. Nowadays, actually all of them. And we work very closely with the IFHA, which is the International Federation for Horse Racing Authorities, in setting these criteria. There's a lot of research and development of methods going on. Some of it is published. Quite a lot is not published because certain levels need to be confidential in order to protect the horses. And that is a difficult balance, and sometimes strongly debated as well. But to preserve the system, we need this. The labs works very close with each other. We often, on a weekly basis, have a correspondence through emails, and as late as yesterday, we had a 3-hour meeting as well with all the labs involved. So when we meet with the labs, we review screening limits and harmonize performance levels. Screening limits are scientifically based limits where the horse is not affected by the drug. harmonized performance levels don't have the scientific background. It's based on a risk assessment and a technical capability of the labs. We share a lot of information, intelligence. Now the most recent we try to find out is what type of drug is used. It's a psychoactive drug used for sedation, and it's not available on a regular market, so it's bought through the darknet, and we're trying to get hold of that. So if anyone by chance would know anything about such a thing, let me know. We will happily buy it in secret and let our labs analyze it, because we will always be one step behind in these things, and we need to try to keep up with that as much as possible. So it's a lot of problem solving with this and establishing best practice. And now both we and IFHA believe that we're working with the best labs in the world, and we have the absolutely strongest quality requirements for these labs. Yes, 5, thank you. I will speed up. So the vet department analyzes the results. Positives to legal department, we publish the negatives. And there's always a risk analysis so that we can use for future testing plans. And if you go to the FEI website and you can just Google Clean Sport Global EADCMP, you will learn a lot more. Now I come to my favorite. It's a program to protect horses against fractures in endurance rides. So the objective is to protect horses from injury by identifying those that have a lower sensitivity, an altered sensitivity, to very frankly, that are nerve blocked before or during the ride, because they have been. And we have a lot of evidence of that. And we want this to be a level playing field, of course, but most important is to protect these horses. And that it's deterrent on the cheaters. So it works through mechanical testing. So we apply a force. Imagine that you have like a ball point of a pen, and we measure that force, so it's measurable. And then we read the evasion reaction from the horse. So it's a mix of mechanics and observing behavioral changes of the horses. And this provides a quantifiable value measured in Newton. So this is how it looks. You have this, the air is pressured through the syringe, through a tube, into this actuator that measures. We can see if it's 2 Newton or 18 Newton or whatever. And then it continues down to this, I can never remember, the transducer. So that has a point that points into the skin, and the horse will react on that. So this is how it works. You see the vet standing by the side of the horse, and then you have another vet reading the reaction of the horse. And I must say it works really well. The horse don't know which leg it is. We put the straps on both forelimbs. And we do this on the field. It's actually going on right now in Ademelo in Netherlands. So it's happening in this very moment. So we can do this before the ride, and we try to do it before the ride as well as during the ride, because then we have like a baseline for that horse during the ride. In Pisa, we took one horse. It had like 3 pre-ride, and then it was over 20 during the ride, after we had received intelligence that something bad had happened out on the course, meaning that someone had blocked the horse out on the course. And this horse was eliminated. And we can also do it after the ride. But that is difficult though, because if horses are very tired, the evasive reaction might be weak. So we need to keep that in mind. A positive result is 20 Newton. And if you come across this, and we're happy to show you how it works, 20 Newton, it hurts. It hurts. So there's no doubt that these horses have an altered sensitivity. It's organized through the veterinary department and funded by our anti-doping program. And we have very experienced vets conducting these examinations, together with a judge in most cases. The equipment and education is closely linked, because it's not just about equipment. The education is equally important. And it's important also that we have biosecurity protocols, calibration protocols for this. And we also video record with body cams. We use GoPro cams to do this, to record the lack, rather, of evasive reaction. So during 2020 and 21, these are the events that we've done. And you see that some horses are tested twice. And the last one, Ärmule, that was early this week. More than 100 tests were carried out. And so far, we've examined 395 horses within our regulatory context. Of course, the studies were much larger than that. 452. So far, only 4 positive horses. And we believe so far it's very promising, because we had no catastrophic injuries during any of the events where we have done this. But we are still just working in Europe due to COVID. We haven't rolled it out in the Middle East yet. And that will be the challenge for next year. So very quickly, if I may, 2 more minutes. So, as mentioned earlier today, rightly, equipment may cause welfare problems for horses. There's no doubt about that. And there's been a huge lot of debate, for example, on bits, nose bands, bridles. I'm personally very skeptic to one brand, one model of spurs. So there are things that are really important to keep an eye on. And we need to regulate harder. We need to harmonize between disciplines, because it's not logical that the jumpers can have almost anything. Dressage is limiting very much, but still requiring double bridle, for example, which to me is completely illogical. So I think there will be it's moving now forward in a way that it's taken too long, I'm sorry to say, but it's moving now in the right direction. And we also, some of it is possible to regulate. Other parts, it's about education and awareness. So we need to combine those two. And I spoke to the dressage trainers, I think it's 3 years ago now, and I asked them, how many of you actually look into the mouth of the horse before you advise your rider on a new bit? And it was one did it. I said, well, why don't you do it? Are you aware how different it can look inside a horse's mouth? So you need to do that. And they were not defensive by any means. They said, of course, yeah, we must do this. So I think, and looking also how dressage worked in Tokyo now, it's moving in the right direction. And it's very important. And I personally think that oral cavity and problems around the head with all the nerves must be focused on, and that's what we're doing as well. So we have this equipment expert groups, mainly people from inside headquarters, but for dressage, we have dressage trainers helping us, and then always on those is also a vet, which is Rachel Murray, I think known to many of you, very prominent researcher, as well as Grand Prix dressage rider, so she really understands both sides, and she has really good, her way of her methods are very sound. So we're very happy to work with her. And if we will eventually also be working with behaviorists, we have had some contact with Pia Haubro in Uppsala and Copenhagen, and she's been also in the veterinary committee meetings. So it's moving in the right direction. It's not moving fast, but it's moving. And finally, we support also research and development for measures for control using new technology. So there's a project now very promising that I hope within a year we will be able to show you that will really be able to monitor and teach riders, but also give us a control measure for the tightness of noseband in a way that's just superior to anything that's been done before. It looks very promising. I saw it for the first time live now in Hagen a few days ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Göran.